On the morning of December 23rd, 1944, the Burmese jungle held its breath. A dense, mist-laden canopy filtered the weak light of dawn, casting long, trembling shadows across a terrain scarred by war. Somewhere in the tangle of vines and mud, the distant clatter of Japanese boots echoed, a rhythm meant to intimidate, to assert dominance. Yet, in the middle of this vast green expanse, a single figure moved with an almost unnatural stillness. He was small, wiry, and unassuming at first glance, but the glint of a kukri knife in his hand caught the faint light, reflecting it in a flash that was almost a warning. This was no ordinary soldier. This was a Gurkha, one of the fabled warriors in Nepal, renowned throughout the British Empire for courage and deadly precision. The Japanese troops, disciplined and confident, were about to encounter something they could not anticipate, and even now, as they advanced in tight formations through the muddy undergrowth, they sensed instinctively that the jungle itself had an ally. The Gurkha's name was Bahadur Rana, though in whispers among fellow soldiers. He was known simply as Bahadur, courage embodied. He had grown up in the foothills of the Himalayas, where mornings began with the clang of kukri against wood, and evenings ended with tales of valor under star-strewn skies. His fingers were calloused from years of wielding that curved blade, yet his movements in the jungle were as fluid as a river bending around rocks. Hari was not just strong. He possessed an intuitive understanding of terrain, of silence, of anticipation. He could read the rustle of a leaf and know whether it was the wind or the footfall of an enemy scout. His presence in Burma was not accidental. The British command had deployed Gurkhas as shock troops, as forces capable of extraordinary feats in situations where conventional soldiers might falter. But even by Gurkha standards, Hari's mission that day would test the limits of human endurance, courage, and cunning. The Japanese advance had been relentless. They believed themselves masters of this land, their recent victories emboldening their arrogance. Over 1,000 troops moved with methodical precision, cutting through the dense underbrush, their bayonets glinting, their discipline unbroken by the oppressive humidity or the stifling heat. They had intelligence suggesting a small British contingent had been spotted in the area, weak, scattered, and vulnerable. What they did not know was that Hari, with his small team, had taken position at a critical choke point, a narrow ridge flanked by steep embankments and dense bamboo clusters. From here, one man could influence the course of an entire engagement, though even Hari understood how unlikely success would seem. Still, he did not flinch. He had been trained for the improbable, and this, he thought, was simply another morning's work. As the first wave of Japanese soldiers approached, the jungle seemed to constrict around them. The rhythmic thud of boots gave way to a tense silence that was broken only by the distant cry of a hornbill. Hari's eyes narrowed, scanning every shadow, every movement. The first enemy soldier stepped onto the ridge, his expression confident but cautious. Hari had no firearms. He carried only his kukri and a few grenades, but his weapon was an extension of his body, and his mind was a finely tuned instrument of anticipation. He crouched, muscles coiled like springs, ready to spring into motion. In that moment, the forest itself seemed to pause, as if aware that something extraordinary was about to occur. The Japanese, unaware, moved in clusters, their numbers giving them a sense of invincibility that Hari was about to challenge in the most improbable way. A sudden rustle in the undergrowth startled the lead Japanese soldier. He turned sharply, and in the fraction of a heartbeat, Hari leapt. The kukri flashed in a clean arc, and the soldier collapsed, eyes wide in disbelief. For a moment, silence reclaimed the ridge. Then another. The Japanese troops froze, unable to comprehend that one man, so unarmed in their eyes, could have felt even a single enemy with such precision. Yet, this was only the beginning. Hari's movements were economical, almost balletic, combining speed, strength, and cunning. Each motion conserved energy while maximizing impact. Each strike a demonstration of skill honed over years of rigorous training and life in unforgiving mountains. To the Japanese, it appeared as though the jungle itself had turned against them, a phantom warrior haunting their advance. Yet to Hari, every motion was a calculation, a survival strategy. He had no illusions about the danger, but he had confidence in his ability to navigate it. The Japanese soldiers attempted to regroup, forming lines and advancing cautiously. Hari retreated just enough to draw them into the narrowest part of the ridge, using the terrain to multiply his effectiveness. The smell of damp earth mixed with sweat and smoke, and the clanging of metal and grunts of exertion filled the air. Still, Hari remained eerily calm, his mind sharp, calculating. He was aware of each enemy movement, each shifting formation, and he exploited their overconfidence. The paradox of the situation, the fearsome reputation of the Gurkhas embodied in a single small figure, created a psychological effect almost as deadly as the blade itself. For the Japanese, every moment became a test of nerve. Every step forward a potential miscalculation that could prove fatal. Amidst the chaos, a subtle irony emerged. Here were hundreds of trained soldiers, armed with rifles, machine guns, and grenades, facing one man wielding a knife. It was a scenario that would have seemed absurd in a briefing room, a tactical nightmare that commanders on both sides might have dismissed as implausible. Yet it was real, unfolding in slow, cinematic pulses across the ridge. Hari's focus never wavered. He moved through the enemy ranks with a rhythm that was almost musical, each strike, each feint choreographed instinctively. And through it all, he remained human, his breathing controlled, his thoughts methodical, his awareness acute. The contrast between his composed efficiency and the enemy's confusion deepened the sense of wonder, making what was happening almost surreal. As the morning deepened, so did the stakes. Hari's small team watched from the shadows, inspired and horrified in equal measure. They had trained for difficult situations, but what they saw now transcended training. It was a living legend, unfolding in real time. The Japanese, meanwhile, struggled to adapt their previous victories, offering little guidance against a single opponent whose actions defied conventional military logic. It was a collision of expectation and reality, a moment where courage, skill, and instinct met unprepared arrogance in a deadly embrace. Hari's calm, unflinching determination became the axis around which the day turned, and as the sun rose higher, it illuminated a scene that would be recounted for decades. One man standing, moving, fighting, almost mythically, against the tide of an entire enemy force. By midday, the ridge was quiet once more, not because the battle had ended, but because Hari had changed its rhythm entirely. The Japanese advance had faltered. Confusion, fear, and awe rippled through their ranks. Hari had not sought glory, nor had he acted recklessly. Every action was deliberate, every moment purposeful. In a world dominated by numbers and firepower, he had shown the extraordinary potential of human courage, skill, and determination. As he paused, crouched behind a fallen tree, surveying the stunned enemy soldiers now regrouping at the far end of the ridge, a faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed his face. The battle was far from over, yet he had already claimed a victory of perception, a triumph that transcended immediate numbers. The Japanese were learning, the hard way, that sometimes one man, armed with resolve and instinct, could become a force beyond expectation. And in that quiet pause, the forest seemed to hold its breath again, as if the jungle itself recognized the legend it had just witnessed, and the story was only beginning. The morning haze began to lift, revealing more of the Burmese jungle in all its oppressive grandeur. Sunlight filtered through thick foliage, catching droplets of dew on leaves and casting fleeting patterns on the mud-slick ground. Bahadur Rana, crouched low behind a fallen banyan, allowed himself a moment to breathe, to recalibrate, though the weight of the challenge ahead never left him. Around him, the jungle thrummed with life. Birds calling from the canopy, insects droning in the humidity, and the occasional distant roar of a river swollen from recent rains. For most men, this environment would have been an obstacle. For Hari, it was a partner. He understood the jungle not as an enemy, but as a terrain to navigate, a medium through which he could turn his disadvantages into advantages. Every vine, every root, every uneven patch of mud was part of a mental map he had built over years of experience and instinctive reading of the natural world. The Japanese, with their rigid formations and reliance on numbers and firearms, were blind to this reality, and that blindness would be costly. Hari was not alone in his endeavor. A small contingent of Gurkhas, his comrades in arms, moved stealthily through the undergrowth, each carrying their own kukri and a quiet determination honed through rigorous training in the highlands of Nepal. They were warriors who had been forged in the crucible of harsh terrain and even harsher discipline, trained to strike decisively, silently, and without hesitation. Yet Hari stood apart. Even among these exceptional soldiers, his reputation for ingenuity and fearless initiative set him above the rest. His team looked to him not just for tactical guidance, but for moral fortitude. In a war defined by chaos, confusion, and randomness, Hari's calm presence acted as a beacon of order. He would lead the engagement not merely with skill, but with an understanding of psychology, perception, and the subtle art of manipulating an opponent's expectations. The Japanese soldiers, numbering in the hundreds, approached with the confidence of those accustomed to victory. Their training emphasized discipline, coordinated movement, and adherence to command, yet it left little room for improvisation. They had faced guerrilla fighters before, but the Gurkhas were different, an unpredictable variable in a rigid equation. Reports from earlier engagements described the Gurkhas as formidable, but the reality of facing one at a choke point like this was far more disorienting than any report could convey. For every cautious advance, Hari anticipated 3 possible reactions, moving in a way that made the enemy hesitate, miscalculate, and, crucially, fear. He exploited this hesitation. A well-placed rustle, a sudden flash of metal, or the faint imprint of footprint in soft mud became tools in a psychological arsenal that far outstripped the brute force of numbers. Hari's understanding of human behavior was as crucial as his mastery of the kukri. He knew that soldiers, even disciplined ones, were fallible under stress. Fear amplified errors, and overconfidence blinded them to risk. As the Japanese troops crested the ridge, he calculated their reactions before they occurred, anticipating which formations would falter first, which soldiers would hesitate, and how panic could ripple like a contagion through disciplined ranks. His strategy was not one of recklessness, but of precision, combining intuition, patience, and an almost mathematical understanding of combat dynamics. Every step he took, every feint, every subtle shift of weight was designed to manipulate perception and create openings that could turn a hopelessly uneven encounter into a tactical advantage. The terrain itself played an indispensable role. The ridge was narrow, flanked by steep embankments on either side, and choked with dense bamboo and undergrowth. Japanese soldiers, confident in their numerical superiority, did not account for the difficulty of maneuvering through such a space under unseen threat. Hari had studied this ridge during reconnaissance and understood its contours intimately. He knew which spots allowed concealment, which areas amplified noise, and which points forced the enemy into predictable paths. By controlling these choke points, Hari could maximize the effect of each strike and minimize exposure. The jungle became both shield and weapon, a living ally that magnified the impact of his actions while hiding his movements. To the Japanese, this interplay between soldier and environment was incomprehensible, as if the very force had joined in his defense. Hari's leadership extended beyond tactics. It was deeply human. He recognized the fears and doubts of his fellow Gurkhas and used small gestures, nods, and quiet words to bolster morale. War was as much a test of mind as of body, and Hari's awareness of this distinction allowed him to inspire calm and focus under extreme pressure. He did not need to shout commands or issue long orders. His presence communicated assurance. The soldiers could see in his eyes the clarity of thought, the unwavering confidence, and the absolute commitment to survival and success. In the midst of danger, that clarity became a force multiplier, turning uncertainty into decisive action. Hari was not just a fighter. He was the axis around which courage and effectiveness revolved. Historical records indicate that the Japanese underestimated the Gurkhas consistently, assuming that numbers alone would dictate outcomes. In prior skirmishes throughout Burma, reports note that Gurkhas were often dismissed as irregular fighters or mountain tribesmen. Capable but predictable, Hari, and the scenario unfolding on this ridge, would challenge those assumptions utterly. Every moment of hesitation he induced, every misstep caused by overconfidence, served as evidence that rigid doctrine could fail against adaptability, instinct, and deep familiarity with the land. Even among seasoned commanders, few could anticipate the disruptive potential of a single, highly skilled soldier acting with complete autonomy in terrain suited to his strengths. The psychological tension extended to both sides. Hari understood fear not as a weakness, but as a tool. He could exploit the uncertainty that rippled through enemy ranks, converting apprehension into paralysis. Meanwhile, his own soldiers witnessed the impact of his actions, gaining confidence not just in their leader's skill, but in the principle that courage, intelligence, and precision could outweigh brute force. This duality, terror for the enemy, reassurance for his comrades, was central to Hurry's strategy. The battlefield became a theater where perception was as potent as weaponry, where anticipation could preempt attack, and where the mind often dictated outcomes as decisively as muscle or blade. By mid-morning, as shadows lengthened and the sun climbed higher, the stage for confrontation was set. Hari and his team were positioned with precision, the jungle concealing their movements and amplifying their reach. The Japanese troops, unaware of the deadly orchestration awaiting them, continued their advance with the same confidence that had carried them through countless engagements. Yet the balance of expectation and reality had shifted irrevocably. Hari, though a solitary figure in their perception, represented a force that numbers alone could not counter. He embodied the principles of skill, intuition, and courage, demonstrating that the interplay between environment, psychology, and human capability could redefine the outcome of an engagement before a single shot was fired. As the ridge became a crucible for this unlikely confrontation, the contrast between assumption and reality grew sharper. The Japanese expected linear combat, predictable patterns, and numerical dominance. Hari intended none of these. His mind, honed by years of training and experience, worked in concert with his body in the terrain, creating a rhythm that defied ordinary military logic. The stage was set, tension coiled like a spring, and the first movements of engagement promised to reveal not just skill, but the extraordinary power of human ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. The battle, though not yet begun in earnest, was already remarkable, and the world of men poised to witness a story that would ripple through history, challenging everything conventional thinking assumed about courage, effectiveness, and the might of one determined individual. The first real clash erupted with a suddenness that startled even Hari. A group of Japanese soldiers, moving confidently along the narrow ridge, had stepped into the trap he had envisioned. Mud squelched under their boots, leaves whispered in their path, and the subtle vibrations of their advance reached Hari's keen ears. In an instant, he lunged from concealment, kukri flashing in a deadly arc. The nearest soldier barely had time to react before collapsing, the glint of steel and the flash of movement leaving him momentarily suspended in disbelief. It was a precise, economical strike, honed over countless drills and years of instinctive practice. Hari did not hesitate. Every movement was intentional, every action calculated to achieve maximum effect while preserving energy. He had studied human reactions, anticipated panic, and now leveraged it with lethal efficiency. The soldiers following closely behind froze, their rhythm disrupted by the sudden, almost surreal loss of their comrade. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to slow on the ridge, and in that space, Hari's advantage expanded. The Japanese attempted to regroup, bayonets thrust forward, rifles raised, voices barking commands that were swallowed by the jungle. Hari retreated deliberately, drawing them deeper into the choke point he had selected. The terrain favored him, a narrow corridor flanked by steep embankments and thick bamboo, where large numbers became a liability rather than an asset. Each footstep the enemy took was anticipated, each maneuver countered with fluid precision. Hari's presence was a blend of physical agility and psychological warfare. The soldiers, trained to rely on coordination and mass, now faced an individual who moved unpredictably, silently, and with uncanny awareness. Fear spread to the ranks like wildfire, amplified by the inexplicable efficiency of a single opponent. For the Japanese, it was a lesson in humility, an awareness that discipline and training could falter in the face of intuition, cunning, and mastery of terrain. Hari's team watched from hidden positions, their breaths silent but hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and admiration. They had fought alongside him before, but this was different. Here, Hari's tactical genius was not merely about strategy. It was about shaping the battlefield moment by moment. The jungle became an extension of his will. Fallen leaves, shifting shadows, the subtle indentation of mud under a boot, all were tools he employed to manipulate perception. The Japanese pressed forward, unaware of how their own overconfidence played into his hands. As one soldier stumbled over a hidden root, Hurry's reflexes allowed him to strike again, dispatching his opponent with controlled precision. Each success reinforced the psychological edge. Every pause, every hesitation was a micro-victory, as devastating in its effect as the blade itself. The confrontation escalated, layering tension upon tension. Japanese soldiers advanced in waves, attempting to close the distance and overwhelm Hari with sheer force. Yet he flowed between positions, exploiting the narrow terrain to neutralize their numerical superiority. One by one, the enemy realized that their rifles and numbers were insufficient against an adversary who moved like a shadow and struck like lightning. The clash of steel and the occasional muffled cry of a wounded soldier punctuated the oppressive jungle stillness. Sweat ran in rivulets down Hurry's face, but his focus never wavered. Each action, while instinctive, was grounded in knowledge of human behavior, terrain, and timing. He anticipated mistakes, created openings, and exacted precise, controlled toll on the advancing force. Amid the chaos, small, almost ironic details emerged. The Japanese, trained for large-scale assaults, had encountered every possible tactical scenario, except for a single, agile opponent who refused to fight conventionally. Their confusion was palpable. Fear crept into their coordination. A soldier would advance confidently, only to freeze mid-step, eyes widening as Hari appeared from concealment. Another would reach for his rifle, only to falter under the weight of uncertainty. The battlefield became a theater of perception, where hesitation was as lethal as any weapon. Hurry's strikes were clinical but quick, leaving no room for prolonged struggle, ensuring that the shock value of each encounter amplified the psychological toll on the enemy. As the battle pressed on, Hurry's endurance and discipline became critical. Hours of intense engagement demanded not only physical strength, but mental resilience. He observed patterns in enemy movements, adapting continuously. Each soldier he engaged became both a lesson and an opportunity. He exploited gaps in their formation, leveraged the landscape, and maintained a rhythm that allowed him to remain elusive while inflicting damage. The Japanese, once confident in their superiority, began to doubt the efficacy of their numbers. Their initial momentum faltered, replaced by cautious, fragmented movements. Hurry's control of the ridge turned what should have been a straightforward advance into a disoriented, chaotic crawl for the enemy, a testament to the power of skill, insight, and calm determination under pressure. The sounds of the jungle, chirping birds, the distant river, the rustle of leaves, interacted with the human drama unfolding within it. Each sensory cue became a tool for Hari, allowing him to position himself optimally and anticipate enemy reactions. He moved with both economy and decisiveness, never wasting energy, never taking unnecessary risks. The Japanese soldiers, in contrast, were constantly reacting, adjusting to forces they could neither fully see nor predict. Each misstep amplified their vulnerability. Hurry's mastery lay not merely in the ability to strike, but in shaping the perception of the battlefield so completely that the enemy's confidence became the instrument of their own undoing. By late morning, the psychological and physical toll on the Japanese became evident. Their formations had broken into disjointed clusters, each movement measured and tentative. The ridge, once a straight path of advance, had become a labyrinth of fear, hesitation, and uncertainty. Hari, though small in number, had transformed the encounter into a display of asymmetrical dominance. His strikes, rapid and controlled, were punctuated by calculated retreats and sudden appearances from hidden vantage points. Each encounter reinforced the impossibility of prediction, turning the Japanese expectation of easy victory into a waking nightmare. It was not merely a test of courage or skill. It was a lesson in the vulnerability of overconfidence when faced with ingenuity and relentless determination. The climactic moment of this engagement arrived when the Japanese commander, seeking to rally his troops, exposed himself briefly at the front of the line. Hari, recognizing the opportunity, moved with deliberate precision. In a seamless, almost fluid sequence, he advanced, struck, and vanished into the undergrowth, leaving a wave of confusion in his wake. The commander's hesitation, amplified by the unexpected loss of soldiers, rippled through the ranks. The ridge, once an avenue for orderly movement, had become a fragmented zone of fear, where every soldier wondered whether the next step could be their last. Hurry's mastery of perception, timing, and environment had reached its apex. His actions had transformed not only the physical outcome of the encounter, but the very mindset of his opponents. By midday, a quiet tension replaced the initial chaos. The Japanese soldiers, battered in morale and numbers, regrouped at the far end of the ridge. Their advance stalled. Hari, crouched behind a natural barricade of fallen timber, surveyed the battlefield with calm eyes. He was fatigued, yes, but unbroken. His team, inspired and alert, remained hidden, ready for the next phase of engagement. The ridge bore the marks of combat. Churned mud, disturbed vegetation, and the eerie stillness that follows intense conflict. Hari's presence, however, remained dominant. Though outnumbered, he had dictated the tempo, leveraged the terrain, and manipulated perception to such an extent that his opponents had become prisoners of uncertainty. It was a victory not yet complete, but one that had shifted the balance irreversibly. The Japanese had encountered not merely a soldier, but a force of nature, disciplined, cunning, and relentless. As the sun climbed higher, casting dappled light across the ridge, Hari allowed himself a fleeting sense of accomplishment. The battle's first act had concluded, but the engagement was far from over. The Japanese, shaken and cautious, were already reassessing their strategy. Hari, attuned to every nuance of sound and movement, prepared for the inevitable resurgence, knowing that success relied not just on skill, but on adaptability, endurance, and foresight. The ridge, once a simple terrain feature, had become a crucible of ingenuity and courage, a proving ground for a solitary warrior whose impact would reverberate far beyond its immediate confines. The story of this confrontation was unfolding in real time, and every breath, every measured step, promised a continuation of the extraordinary saga already in motion. As the afternoon sun slanted through the dense canopy, the ridge fell into a tense stillness, the kind of silence that carries both exhaustion and expectation. Hari Bahadur Rana crouched behind a jagged outcrop of rock, sweat trickling down his brow, his lungs heavy with exertion, yet his senses remained razor-sharp. The Japanese had retreated slightly, regrouping at the far end of the ridge, their formations fractured, eyes darting, hands gripping rifles with a tremor that betrayed unease. Hari's eyes scanned the terrain, noting every displaced leaf, every indentation in the mud, each one a clue to enemy movement. He had already turned the impossible into reality. One man had destabilized a force 100 strong, but the engagement was far from over. He understood the precarious balance of advantage, knowing that in warfare, no victory is truly secure until the enemy's capacity to respond is nullified. Hari's small team of Gurkhas moved like shadows through the underbrush, silent yet alert, inspired by his example. They had witnessed their leader dispatch multiple enemies with an ease that bordered on the supernatural, but they also saw the discipline and restraint behind each action. Hari's skill was not merely in strength or speed. It was in calculation, in foresight, in knowing when to strike and when to observe. The battlefield had become a living canvas, and he painted it with precision, manipulating perception as deftly as he wielded his kukri. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig underfoot, every echo through the bamboo was accounted for, transformed into tactical intelligence. His ability to harmonize instinct with strategy had already inflicted psychological damage far beyond the physical toll, and he knew the Japanese were reeling from both. The Japanese, once confident in the predictability of their advance, now faced an enigma they could not solve. Their commander, temporarily shaken by losses and confusion, attempted to restore order, yet even his presence could not compensate for the creeping uncertainty that Hari had instilled. Soldiers whispered among themselves, eyes scanning the jungle for a threat they could neither locate nor anticipate. Reports from previous campaigns had emphasized the Gurkhas' tenacity, yet nothing prepared them for the reality of one man acting with precision of a disciplined unit. Hari had not only survived against overwhelming odds, he had reshaped the battlefield into a contest of nerves and perception, one that favored skill, cunning, and audacity over sheer numbers. As the hours passed, the tension on the ridge intensified. Hari moved deliberately, advancing to intercept small clusters of enemy soldiers who ventured too close, then retreating when larger formations threatened to overwhelm him. His movements were rhythmic, almost musical in their efficiency, each step a blend of balance, calculation, and instinct. From hidden vantage points, his team observed the effect of their leader's actions. Japanese soldiers faltered, overestimated threats, misstepped, and occasionally froze entirely, caught in the web of anticipation Hari had woven. Each encounter, while swift and decisive, reinforced a psychological dominance that numbers alone could never achieve. The battlefield was no longer merely a test of strength. It was a contest of perception, where hesitation could prove fatal and clarity of mind became the deadliest weapon. By mid-afternoon, Hari had transformed the ridge into a stage of calculated chaos. Japanese casualties had mounted, though precise numbers were difficult to ascertain amidst the forest disorder. Yet the effect on morale was unmistakable. Soldiers who had expected an orderly advance were now hesitant, disoriented, and fearful of every shadow. Even the most experienced among them questioned their judgment, their confidence eroded by a force they could not quantify. Hari, meanwhile, remained composed, his breathing controlled, his movements economical, conserving strength while maintaining psychological pressure. He knew that victory depended not on eliminating every enemy's soldier, but on ensuring the impossibility of organized opposition. One precise strike could ripple through the ranks, creating disproportionate effect. He relied on this principle, striking sparingly yet lethally. The climax of the engagement arrived at a moment that seemed almost suspended in time. The Japanese commander, in a desperate attempt to rally his troops, moved forward along the narrowest part of the ridge. Hari, positioned slightly above and behind, observed every motion with clinical patience. The soldiers around the commander hesitated, caught between advancing and retreating, unsure whether to trust their own eyes or the evidence of repeated losses. Hari struck in that precise instant, a flash of kukri in motion, a controlled, lethal arc. The commander fell, his fall reverberating through the ranks like a shock wave. Panic and confusion erupted. Soldiers scattered, some retreating, some immobilized by indecision. Hari's mastery of the terrain, his understanding of psychology, and his physical skill converged in a singular moment of decisive action. The battle's outcome, once uncertain, was now clear. The Japanese had been broken not by overwhelming force, but by calculated precision, audacity, and insight. In the aftermath, the ridge bore silent witness to the extraordinary sequence of events. Mud churned by boots, snapped bamboo, and the faint scent of smoke and blood mingled with the earthy aroma of the jungle. Hari's team moved swiftly, securing positions, ensuring that no regrouping enemy could gain an advantage. They were weary, heart still racing from adrenaline, but inspired by what they had witnessed. Hari's presence remained the fulcrum of their confidence, a living example of courage, skill, and unyielding resolve. His ability to command through example, rather than orders, had transformed fear into action, doubt into determination. The ridge, once a mere feature terrain, had become a crucible of human ingenuity and spirit. Historically, the engagement would become emblematic of Gurkha prowess and adaptability. Casualty figures, where recorded, suggest that the Japanese suffered heavily relative to the scale of their assault, though Hari's meticulous documentation focused more on strategic outcome than numbers. What mattered most was a demonstration of principle, that a single, highly skilled and disciplined individual could alter the dynamics of an encounter far beyond what conventional analysis would suggest. Observers, both contemporary and historical, noted the psychological mastery Hari displayed, recognizing that fear, perception, and terrain could outweigh mass force in determining results. The engagement became a case study in asymmetrical warfare, a lesson in the interplay between human capability, environment, and ingenuity. Hari, in quiet reflection, understood the implications of the day's events. Victory had been achieved through focus, skill, and relentless application of principle. Yet he remained grounded, aware that survival depended on vigilance and adaptability. His gaze swept the ridge one last time, noting displaced foliage and subtle disturbances that marked the enemy's withdrawal. The Japanese, defeated in both confidence and position, receded into the jungle, leaving the ridge under Gurkha control. Hari allowed himself a moment of calm, not triumph, recognizing that the battlefield demanded continuous awareness, and that the preservation of life, strategy, and morale was as crucial as any singular act of bravery. The ridge had tested him, revealed his limits, and affirmed his extraordinary capabilities. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Hari and his team descended from their positions, leaving behind a tableau of calculated chaos and decisive mastery. The ridge, silent once more, held the memory of the day. One man's skill, courage, and insight against the expectation of overwhelming force. The psychological imprint on the Japanese was indelible. For Hari and his comrades, the day reinforced the power of discipline, adaptability, and courage in the most extreme circumstances. The story of the ridge would endure, not merely as a tale of combat, but as a testament to the extraordinary potential of human resolve, skill, and foresight. One man had rewritten the rules of engagement, demonstrating that in the right hands, even the smallest figure could command the battlefield, shape perception, and leave a legacy that would echo through history. Hari Bahadur Rana stood on the ridge's edge, the faint glow of sunset illuminating the sweat and grime on his face, the kukri at his side reflecting the last rays of light. He breathed in the forest's humid air, aware of the silence that now enveloped him, a silence earned through precision, courage, and extraordinary human insight. The Japanese retreat was complete, morale shattered, strategy undone. Hari's name would be remembered, whispered in the corridors of military history, in letters home, and in the shared memory of those who had witnessed his mastery. The ridge, once just a feature of the jungle, had become a testament to the extraordinary impact of one determined, skilled, and unwavering individual. In that moment, with the forest around him alive yet subdued, Hari Bahadur Rana embodied the essence of courage, precision, and human potential, leaving behind a story that would inspire generations, a story of one man standing against many and prevailing,